Coming up, we're looking back at one of the most horrific murder cases in East Tennessee history. 18 years ago, we first heard the names Channon, Christian, and Chris Newsom. Since their brutal deaths, their families have shared their stories, so they'll never be forgotten. Today, we're looking back at the crimes that impacted these two families and what they did to help future crime victims and protect other families from similar pain.
Ten News is sponsored by Premier Family of Dealerships. 10 About Town on WBIR starts now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brittany Bailey. It is one of the most shocking and horrifying murder cases to ever happen in East Tennessee, one that took two young lives full of promise and put their families through 8 criminal trials. The tragic murders shocked the community and the families of these two young victims. 21-year-old Channon Christian attended the University of Tennessee. Her boyfriend, Chris Newsom, was a 23-year-old former Halls High School baseball standout. Armed men carjacked and killed them just a few days into the new year of 2007. 2 young lives were lost and 2 families were forever changed. We do have a warning. The details of this case may not be suitable for some of you. It all started on a Saturday night, January 6, 2007. Channon Christian and her boyfriend Chris Newsom were planning to hang out and watch movies before going to a party later in the evening. Friends last saw them alive around 9 p.m. Not long after, the pair was carjacked in Shannon's 4Runner from a North Knoxville apartment complex. 3 men took them, brothers LaMarcus Davidson and LaTalvis Cobbins and Eric Boyd. The carjackers blindfolded them and drove them in Shannon's 4Runner to Davidson's rented house on Chipman Street, just about 3 miles from the apartment complex. According to the investigation, Chris Newsom was raped an hour or 2 before his death. In his final moments, he was marched barefoot to a nearby railroad track. He was shot 3 times in the neck, back, and head. The killers had stuffed a sock in his mouth, tied his wrists and ankles, and covered his head with a sweatshirt tied around his neck with shoestrings. His body was doused in gasoline and set on fire. A railroad employee found his body the next afternoon near the tracks. Channon was brutally tortured and raped in multiple ways. DNA evidence suggests she was raped by Cobbins and Davidson. She was hit in the head, and bleach was used in her mouth and vaginal area to try to destroy DNA evidence. She was hogtied and put in a garbage bag while still alive, with her head wrapped in a second garbage bag. She suffocated to death. On January 9th, Knoxville police stormed the home on Chipman Street after a fingerprint found in Shannon's Toyota led them there. That's where they found her body, stuffed in a garbage can in the kitchen. By then, the suspects had fled, and the search was on to find them. There would be 2 additional names added to that list of suspects in the murders of Channon Christian and Chris Newsom. In all, 5 people were charged with multiple counts. LaMarcus Davidson was known as Slim. He was the crime ringleader and 25 years old at the time.
The punishment is death.
He's now on death row in Nashville. His brother, LaTalvis Cobbins, was 24 years old when the murders happened. Jurors convicted him of rape, murder, and facilitation of murder. He's serving a life sentence with no chance at parole. DNA from both of the brothers was found on Shannon's body. Eric Boyd was the oldest of the suspects. He was 35 years old at the time. He and Davidson had served time together in prison. He also was the only suspect to not face state charges initially. Instead, a federal jury convicted him of being an accessory to carjacking. 24-year-old George Thomas, a friend of Cobbins's, was a weekend guest at the Chipman Street home. His attorneys argued he was homeless at the time of the killings and that he was not a willing participant. Thomas, though, was found guilty of 38 counts by a jury in Hamilton County. Vanessa Coleman was 18 years old and was dating Cobbins at the time of the killings. An out-of-county jury found her guilty of facilitation in Channon Christian's murder, along with kidnapping and rape, but she was found not guilty of murder. She was sentenced to 53 years in prison, but after a November 2012 retrial, a different jury convicted her on similar but lesser charges, and she was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Those 5 suspects are all guilty for their various roles in the kidnapping, rapes, and murders. 2 young people who had their whole lives ahead of them were taken far too soon. Channon and Chris had just started dating in November of 2006, a few months before their deaths. But Mary Newsom told us her son adored Channon. Channon Gail Christian was a senior majoring in sociology at the University of Tennessee. The 2003 Farragut High School graduate was popular with an engaging smile and loved to play golf. She would have turned 40 years old this April. Channon Christian's boyfriend, Chris Newsom, was 23 years old. He worked as a carpenter. He had been a baseball standout at Halls High School. He was a pitcher and outfielder. His mom says as a baby, his pediatrician told her Chris would be an athlete. She says he was that and then some. He loved all kinds of sports. He graduated in 2002 and attended Pellissippi State. He had 2 older sisters and an older brother. Dad Hugh tells us his son was a talented carpenter whose crown molding is featured in some of the homes in Knox County. Chris would have turned 42 in September. The torture slayings thrust the Christian and Newsom families into the spotlight when the initial frantic search began to find the missing couple. It was Shannon's parents and friends who found her abandoned 4Runner near Chipman Street thanks to a search party they had put together. And since the early days of this tragic story, East Tennessee has stood behind both families, from their close friends and relatives to people they've never met. Gary and Dina Christian were perhaps the parents remembered most. It's hard to forget Gary's emotions during the trials. The couple has since divorced. Gary is now married to Lori. We'll have more with the families coming up a little later. Now, all these years later, it's a lot trying to keep track of the suspects, their trials, and their sentences. What we do know is this. On January 11, 2007, authorities arrested LaMarcus Davidson, LaTalvis Cobbins, George Thomas, Eric Boyd, and Vanessa Coleman. Their trials would follow in the next 2 years. LaTalvis Cobbins was the first to go on trial on state charges in 2009. Cobbins was convicted on multiple charges, including first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. Next up was the trial for his half-brother, LaMarcus Davidson, the ringleader. Davidson was found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to death in October of 2009. In December of that same year, George Thomas was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Vanessa Coleman, who was dating Cobbins at the time, was found guilty of facilitation of Channon Christian's murder, kidnapping, and rape. She was acquitted on murder charges, though, and sentenced to 53 years in prison, with a later retrial reducing her sentence to 35 years. Of the 5 suspects, Eric Boyd's case perhaps stands out the most. First, he was the oldest of the 5 suspects, 35 at the time. He was the only suspect to not face state charges at first. Instead, he was found guilty in federal court of being an accessory to kidnapping by hiding Davidson after the killings. And he was convicted in federal court before the others went on trial in state court. The families, in particular the Newsoms, always thought Boyd played a larger role in their son's murder, but prosecutors at first said they didn't have the evidence to pursue a murder charge against him. But Boyd was eventually indicted in state court and convicted in 2019 of 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with rape and kidnapping. That same year, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 90 years. After those initial convictions, talk of the crimes settled down just a bit, but then the unthinkable happened. A scandal in the Knox County courts would lead to retrials for some of the suspects. More on that coming up after this. In January of 2011, the late Judge Richard Baumgardner, who oversaw the initial state cases, stepped down after authorities learned he used his position as head of drug court to get pills for his own addiction. As a result, 2 of the Chipman Street cases were retried. In November of 2011, retrials were granted for George Thomas, LaTalvis Cobbins, and Vanessa Coleman. In the end, legal challenges meant Cobbins would not be retried, so that left 2 retrials. In November of 2012, Vanessa Coleman was up first to be tried for a second time. She was again convicted, but this time on lesser charges, with her new sentence, 35 years. George Thomas was retried in May of 2013 and sentenced on every one of the same charges. He was given life in prison with the possibility of parole after 51 years. As for the other 3 suspects who did not get retrials, Cobbins is serving life without parole in West Tennessee. Davidson is on death row in Nashville. In 2016, the Tennessee Supreme Court upheld his conviction and sentence. As for Eric Boyd, in 2019 in state court, he was tried and convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 90 years. These days, Hugh and Mary Newsom live a quiet life full of family, including grandchildren. They say they're grateful to those who remember Chris and try to keep his memory alive. Mary says seeing cardinals and butterflies are reminders of Chris being with them. The Newsoms sat down with anchor Robin Wilhoit recently to discuss their son and the trial for the man they believed all along was his killer, Eric Boyd.
How did you make it through that process, that gruesome process of having to hear over and over again?
Well, I just had a gut feeling that Eric Boyd was the one that killed him. And I wasn't going to let Eric get away with it. And to get the stuff that we needed, we had to get somebody to tell us that Eric Boyd was involved. So we went ahead and tried, went down to the prison in Nashville and spoke to what was his name there?
Was it?
Cobbins.
Cobbins, yeah, Cobbins, and asked him if he would volunteer to come back and you know, talk about Eric Boyd. And he said he would, and that, but he needed to have permission and everything. So we went down there again in December with the prosecutor, and that when we got back there, he lied about it, said he wouldn't do it. So that kind of left us without anything to go on. Well, we had a friend that called us, and he said, don't give up, he said, because you still got another one that you can go to. He said, don't give up now. So he really encouraged us. He would call us every evening and give us encouragement. He said, go and get another one to talk about him.
George Thomas.
And so he went and testified. But we had to get permission, you know, through the DA's office and everything. So we went through a lot to you know, be able to get him. But we finally did. And when they had to do the trial, I remember I was sitting there, you know, waiting for the verdict and just hoping that it would be a guilty verdict on him. And when they said guilty, I cried. I was so happy that I just cried. And when he walked out of that courtroom, he turned to me and he said, I'll get you. And I thought, no, buddy, I got you. You know, you're not going to get me now.
Channon was a beautiful girl, and Chris was just carried away with her. I mean, he really liked her. You can tell with those pictures.
They're, and the joy you could see on their faces is pure joy to be together.
I think he had finally found a girl that he was really interested in, and I think they would have got married.
And one thing that sticks in their mind is that song, What Would He Be Today? We'll never know.
You can see Robin's full interview on the WBIR YouTube channel. We also talked with the Christian family. Gary and Dina Christian divorced, and Gary has since remarried and become a public speaker. Many, though, remember Gary for his emotional reactions to the testimony during the course of so many trials. Recently, he and I had a chance to talk about how he remembers his daughter. Gary, I want to talk about, first of all, just tell us again about Channon in your own words.
She was spoiled. She was happy. She's beautiful. I don't know where she got her looks from, but it wasn't me. She She loved life, that's for sure. She was a Christian. She couldn't stand drugs. Wouldn't be around them. Even if it was somebody she was pretty close to. If they were doing something, she was out of there. She cared about people. Her best friend's mom passed away. Never will forget this. We were in Louisiana at my mother's house, mother and dad's house, and when I went to bed, she was talking to Kara. And when I woke up the next morning, she was talking to Kara. If she considered you a friend, she was a friend. She didn't turn her back. She didn't change horses in the middle of the stream, in other words. She, if you were her friend, you were her friend. And
Do you remember the last time you saw her or talked to her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She came down the stairs and she said, "Bye, Dad, I love you." And we had this thing. I said, she said, "I'm going to work. And I'm going over to Kara's when I get off. We got a birthday party to go to." I said, "All right, baby, be careful. And I love you more." And she said, "No, I love you more." And I heard her come back towards the front door. And when she went out the door, she said, "I love you more," and slammed the door. So she won that battle. That was the last time.
We had hoped this week to speak with Gary's ex-wife, Shannon's mother, Dina. Unfortunately, she was under the weather and couldn't meet up with us, but she did say that this is a very hard time of year for her. Oh, the brutal killings of Channon and Chris are just as fresh in the minds of those who covered the case at the time. So joining me now to talk more about this are anchor John Becker, investigative reporter John North. This has been something that has touched our community for almost 2 decades now.
I was talking to a friend of ours in the media, and she said, this stopped parents in their tracks. It changed the way they parented. It changed the way all of us thought about the safety of our community. It's hard to stress now in this world of news everywhere just how rapt our attention was on this case in terms of the entire community.
When it first happened, it was like this very dark cloud sort of came over the community, and then it just didn't go away because of the ongoing prosecutions and then the retrials. I'll be honest with you, it's been a couple of years since I have spent much time thinking about it. I have thought about it a lot in the last week, and it's gut-wrenching yet again.
And in speaking about gut-wrenching terms, we know colleagues who really had to pull away from journalism because of this case, or their lives took a different turn, in part because of this case. It was that impactful, specifically the details that you listened to in court and that we dealt with on a daily basis.
Yeah, to be honest, when I was here the first time covering some of the trials, I sort of stepped into a role because one of our colleagues needed to step away from it. And I think, again, anybody who's covered this, as you said, just remembers those details. There were pictures shown, there were details mentioned in testimony that we'll never forget. Of course, seeing Gary Christian specifically, and that's something that we talked about. We all remember sort of the anger that you could just feel. It was palpable coming off of him. And I talked to him about that, and he said, it's taken him a while to sort of let go of that. And I don't know if you could tell in the interview we just saw that he is a little bit of a different person.
I think it's important, John, you brought this up, but the role that the families played in this investigation was absolutely critical. Explain some of those key details that people may not remember.
Couple things for sure. It's critical to discuss, to recognize, and for all of us to be thinking about if we have loved ones, if something horrific happens. First of all, it was Dina, Shannon's mom, because the phone was in her name, that was like, I want to try and find out where that last call came from, where she was located when the phone was last used. It was Dina.
Just to be critical on this point, this is at a time when Channon was a captive.
That's right.
And the suspects at that time had her use the phone to try to buy some time.
That's right. And they didn't know where she was. They knew something was wrong, and through the phone company, they were able to figure out that she had last pinged near Cherry Street, which was not far at all from the Chipman Street house. The other thing is this: Shannon's Toyota 4Runner, which was used in the carjacking and which the killers and the others took to Chipman Street, nobody could find where that was. And it was the family and friends of Channon who said, we are going to go find this. They knew Cherry Street, and so they just basically did a grid search, as they would later testify in multiple trials, and say, we're going to find this Toyota. And sometime in the middle of the night, I think on the 8th, maybe 1:30, 1:45 in the morning, they found that vehicle parked, and it proved significant to lead to other developments in that case.
And Brittany, you talked to the Newsoms about their role in going after Eric Boyd. As Chris's mom said, we really felt all along he had a key role in it. You spoke to them about it, and they advocated for themselves and their son.
They did through the years, and you heard them talking with Robin in that recent piece that we just showed. They never gave up, and they were determined. And, you know, I thought it was so interesting, the part where Mary said, as Eric Boyd was leaving the courtroom, he said something like, I'm going to get you, and she said, no, I've got you.
Yeah.
And that is just further proof that these families have tirelessly, you know, advocated for their families, and that's why also laws have changed because of them as well, which we'll be talking about in just a couple of minutes. Well, also in 2019, John North here co-hosted a podcast on Eric Boyd's state trial, and it went over the heartbreaking details of the horrible murders, and you can listen to that podcast right now on WBIR.com. And we will have more on how the families have honored Channon and Chris coming up after this. Since the murders, the families of both Channon and Chris have worked tirelessly to bring the murderers to justice and to help others. In June of 2014, Governor Bill Haslam signed the Chris Newsom and Channon Christian Acts into law. Chris's bill ends the practice of the 13th juror, which had required a judge to sign a unanimous verdict. Shannon's bill prevents attorneys from using allegations from a victim's past if those allegations are not relevant to the case. The home where Channon Christian was tortured and killed is no longer on Chipman Street. Back in 2008, Waste Connections next door bought the site and tore down the house. But there are lasting memorials to the couple all over the Knoxville area. And the families have created events in memory of both Channon and Chris. The Newsoms created a foundation and hold the Chris Newsom Memorial Baseball Tournament every spring to honor Chris and Channon. Mary Newsom tells us the foundation has given out 42 scholarships to Hall's High School students. The Newsoms say they always hear from the scholarship recipients, and that makes them feel good. They say they think Chris would be proud of that. Shannon's family also created a foundation in her memory. The foundation was established in 2009 and has given scholarships to female Farragut High School graduates who plan to attend the University of Tennessee. It's since been opened up to be offered to students from Knox and surrounding counties who will attend UT. Most of the money is raised in a golf tournament held in her honor every year.
Channon had just, I have a picture of me and Channon standing on a tee box. Now this tee box was in Louisiana. She had just, well, she came out that day we were playing, small town. We were playing, and she came out with some more of my family to kind of watch us. Well, she wanted to hit a ball. So I got her on the tee box. First time she'd ever been on the tee box. Didn't know how to hold a club, nothing. And I kind of told her, just stand this way, put it in the middle of your feet, blah, blah, blah. And she knocked the ever-living fire out of one, straight as an arrow. I'd played golf with people who didn't hit the ball that far. And she thought, well, it was just a fluke. Well, she did it again. She didn't hit any of the other ones better than she hit the first one, but she hit a lot of good ones, 4 or 5, right there off of that same tee box. Fell in love with golf. Had just started to want to play. And I had got her some golf shoes. We had clubs for her to use. I got her some shoes. And she loved to watch golf. She loved to go out to the golf course and be there and watch, you know, her boyfriend or her daddy or whatever play. And she was just starting. And the first thing I ever recognized of hers, when the police were showing us stuff that they had found at different places, was her golf shoes.
In all, the families have given out tens of thousands of dollars in scholarships from both foundations. And again, a quick note that we did hope to speak with Dina Christian for this as well, but she was under the weather and was not able to talk with us this week. Thanks so much for watching. And a reminder, you can see more of our stories on the Christian Newsom families right now on our website, WBIR.com. And you can see our full interviews with Gary Christian and the Newsoms on WBIR.com and our YouTube page. Thanks so much for watching.